Prague, the 27th of May, 1942, 10:30 in the morning, a hairpin bend in the road at Libeň, where the street narrows and curves so sharply that even a powerful car has to slow almost to a stop. A young man in a raincoat stands at the curve with a folded newspaper over his arm. Under the newspaper is a Sten submachine gun. Down the hill, an open-topped Mercedes is coming, exactly on schedule, exactly on the only road it ever takes, carrying exactly one man inside it who has refused, again and again, to ride with an armed escort. That man is Reinhard Heydrich, SS Obergruppenführer, Chief of the Reich Main Security Office, Reichsprotektor of Bohemia and Moravia, the Nazi governor of occupied Czechoslovakia. 4 months earlier, he sat at the head of a table at a villa on the Wannsee and chaired the meeting that gave bureaucratic shape to the mass murder of European Jewry. The Czechs who live under his rule call him the Hangman, the Butcher of Prague. Even his own colleagues in the SS, men who do not frighten easily, speak of him in a lowered voice. He is, at this moment, the highest-ranking official the Third Reich has anywhere in occupied Europe outside Germany itself, and within the hour, he will be the highest-ranking Nazi official anyone has ever managed to get close enough to kill. He does not know that a mirror is flashing a signal further up the road. He does not know that the young man with the newspaper has practiced this exact motion, in an English field, 100 times. He only knows that his open car, no roof, no armor, no convoy, is slowing for the turn, the way it slows for this same turn every single morning, because he believes, with the total confidence of a man who has never once been made to feel fear, that no one in this conquered country would ever dare. The car reaches the bend, the young man steps into the road, drops the newspaper, raises the Sten gun to his shoulder, and pulls the trigger at point-blank range. Nothing happens. The gun has jammed. And in the half-second in which Reinhard Heydrich should already be dead, a second man standing further along the road instead does something almost as old and almost as simple. He pulls the pin on a modified anti-tank grenade and throws it at the car. To understand how exiled soldiers ended up standing on that curve with a jammed gun and a live grenade, and what happens in the 17 days after the throw, you have to go back to the man in the car, and to the war he was already fighting long before anyone came for him. Reinhard Heydrich was born in 1904 in Halle, in Germany, into a household that prized culture above almost everything else. His father ran a conservatory of music. The family staged operas in their own home. Heydrich grew up an accomplished violinist and a formidable fencer, tall, blonde, cold-eyed, physically almost the caricature of the Nazi racial ideal the regime he would later serve loved to advertise. He trained as a naval officer, rose steadily, and was then discharged from the Navy in disgrace over a personal scandal involving a broken engagement. A humiliation that, by most accounts of the men who knew him afterward, he never fully forgave the world for. He found his way instead into the rising SS, and there he found the one thing the Navy had denied him, a system built to reward exactly the qualities he had in abundance: cold intelligence, total ruthlessness, an almost complete absence of empathy. Heinrich Himmler made him chief of the SS Intelligence Service, the SD, and within a few years, Heydrich had built it into one of the most feared instruments of the regime, a filing system of enemies, real and imagined, that reached into every ministry in Berlin. Hitler himself is said to have privately called him the man with the iron heart, and to have described him elsewhere as a young evil god of death, dangerous even to his own side, a man the regime was lucky to keep on a leash rather than have turned against it. Heydrich married young, to Lena von Osten, and the two of them raised a family of 4 children, even as he built his career inside the machinery of the SS, a domestic life that ran, without apparent contradiction in his own mind, alongside the darkest work of the regime. He helped organize the Kristallnacht pogrom in 1938. In the summer of 1941, as German armies pushed into the Soviet Union, it was Heydrich who briefed the commanders of the Einsatzgruppen, the mobile killing squads that would go on to murder by the hundreds of thousands across the occupied East, on the scope of what Berlin now wanted from them. And on the 20th of January, 1942, at a lakeside villa in Wannsee, Heydrich sat at the head of the table and walked a room full of state secretaries and ministry officials through the coordination of what the regime now called the final solution. 90 minutes of dry, bureaucratic language, followed by cognac, deciding the machinery of extermination for an entire continent's Jewish population. He had not invented the idea. He gave it a filing system and a timetable. By then he was already something else too. Since September of 1941, he had been Reichsprotektor of Bohemia and Moravia, sent to Prague specifically because Berlin considered the Czech lands dangerously restive, sabotage rising, war production for the German military machine slipping behind schedule. Heydrich arrived and, within weeks, had crushed it. He declared martial law. He executed resistance leaders within days of their arrest, sometimes within hours. And then, with the same cold precision, he did something his predecessor had not. He raised food rations for Czech industrial workers, expanded worker welfare programs, opened resorts and holiday schemes for laborers who met their quotas, and made himself, briefly, almost popular among the very people he was terrorizing. Carrot in one hand, gallows in the other. Production climbed, sabotage collapsed. Hitler was watching, and Hitler was impressed. There was talk in Berlin that Heydrich, still only in his 30s, was being groomed for something larger still. Some in his own circle were beginning to fear him more than they feared Himmler, which is exactly why, thousands of miles away in London, a government with no country left to govern decided he had to die. Edvard Beneš led the Czechoslovak government in exile from a set of borrowed offices in London, presiding over a state that existed mostly on paper, its territory occupied, its people living under a man who had just proven he could pacify them faster and more completely than Berlin had dared hope. Beneš needed something the exiles could point to, proof to the Allies that Czechoslovak resistance was alive, and proof to the people at home that London had not forgotten them. He turned to Britain's Special Operations Executive, the wartime agency built to arm and train resistance across occupied Europe, and together they built a plan with a code name, Operation Anthropoid. Its target was Reinhard Heydrich. Its instrument would be two men. Jozef Gabčík was a Slovak, born in 1912, a soldier in the Czechoslovak army before the country was carved apart by Hitler's annexations in 1938 and 1939. Jan Kubiš was a Czech, born in 1913, a young man from a farming family in Moravia who had likewise worn the uniform of a country that no longer existed. Both men had escaped after the German occupation, made the long, dangerous overland run through Poland and the Balkans, and eventually reached France to join the reconstituted Czechoslovak army in exile. Gabčík, by some accounts, working for a time in a chemical plant before he ever put on a uniform at all. When France collapsed in June of 1940, they were among the thousands of Allied soldiers scrambling for any port that would still take them, evacuated eventually to Britain, where what remained of the Czechoslovak forces regrouped under Beneš's government. There they were pulled from the ranks by SOE recruiters out of a much larger pool of volunteers and sent north, to the isolated training grounds of the Scottish Highlands, where men from occupied Europe learned silent killing, demolitions, small arms handling, and how to hold a false identity under hostile interrogation. Instructors who had themselves fought in back-alley wars taught them to kill a sentry without a sound, to blow a rail line, to read a face for the tell that means a lie is about to break. From Scotland they moved south to the parachute school at Ringway, near Manchester, jumping again and again from towers and aircraft until the fall itself became routine, then a matter of muscle memory rather than nerve. They were quiet men, by every account of those who trained beside them, Gabčík the more outgoing of the two, quick with a joke, restless. Kubiš, steadier, more withdrawn, the kind of soldier an officer trusts with the details no one else remembers. Neither had been told, at first, exactly what they were training for. Eventually they were, and from that day on their training narrowed to a single, unforgiving purpose: get close enough to Reinhard Heydrich to kill him, and find some way to survive doing it. Weather delayed the operation for weeks through the autumn of 1941, cancelled flight after cancelled flight, the two men waiting in England with a mission they could describe to almost no one, memorizing and rememorizing the layout of a city neither of them had seen in years, rehearsing the same short walk from a tram stop to a curve in a road until it no longer needed thought. Finally, on the night of the 28th into the 29th of December 1941, an RAF Halifax bomber carried Gabčík and Kubiš, along with a second team of parachutists codenamed Silver A, out over the blacked-out fields of the Protectorate. The plan called for them to land near Pilsen, close to contacts who were expecting them. Whether from bad weather, navigational error, or the sheer difficulty of finding an unlit drop zone from 4 miles up in total darkness, they came down instead far to the east, near the village of Nevízdy, in deep snow, disoriented, weeks of careful planning already thrown into chaos before their boots had even fully touched Czech soil. And now they were alone in occupied territory, in the coldest weeks of a hard winter, with a mission they could tell no one, in a country where a single wrong word to the wrong stranger could put the Gestapo at a door within the hour. What Gabčík and Kubiš needed most in those first freezing days was not weapons. It was people, ordinary Czechs willing to risk everything by simply opening a door. They found them. An underground resistance network operating quietly around Prague, known to its members by the code name Jindra, took the two men in, moved them between safe houses, fed them, hid their parachutes and their equipment, and began the slow, patient work of tracking the daily habits of the second most powerful man in the Nazi security state. Families who had never fired a shot in anger now had 2 SOE-trained soldiers sleeping in their apartments, aware that if the Gestapo ever found out, the entire household would die for it, not only the adults who had made the choice, but very often the children who had not. They took the risk anyway, month after month, without complaint. The months of hiding were not simply idle waiting. They were the part of the operation with the least glamour and the greatest danger. Long stretches spent doing nothing more dramatic than staying alive and staying unnoticed, in a city crawling with informers, ration cards, curfews, and the constant low hum of fear that occupation puts into ordinary streets. Elsewhere in the Protectorate, a separate radio team, Silver A, kept a fragile wireless link open to London, tapping out reports on troop movements and German morale between long silences whenever the Gestapo's own direction-finding vans came too close for comfort. Gabčík and Kubiš depended on that same underground network for food, forged papers, and word of which streets to avoid on a given day. In the small, dangerous intimacy of hiding for months inside other people's homes, both men grew close to the families sheltering them. Gabčík, by several accounts, fell for a young woman connected to one of the safe houses, a fragment of ordinary life stitched into the months of waiting to kill a man neither of them had ever spoken to. For nearly 5 months, they lived inside this net of quiet, extraordinary courage, learning Heydrich's routine down to the minute, and the closer they studied him, the more one detail kept repeating, almost like an invitation. Other plans were drawn up and discarded before this one. A scheme to strike Heydrich aboard a train was studied and abandoned as impractical. His fortified office at Prague Castle and his heavily guarded residence were both far too closely watched to approach. What kept surfacing instead was the road. Reinhard Heydrich lived at a requisitioned chateau at Panenské Břežany, north of the city, and drove into Prague each morning along the same route, at roughly the same hour, in the same open-topped Mercedes. He had been urged more than once to travel in an armored vehicle with an armed escort, the way a man in his position was supposed to. He refused. Some who worked near him said it was contempt, the certainty that the Czechs were a beaten, cowed people incapable of touching him. Others called it vanity, the theater of the fearless overlord riding through his conquered province with the top down, visible to everyone, untouchable. Whatever the reason, it meant that every morning, at a particular hairpin curve in the road at Libeň, a spot where a tram line also crossed and forced traffic to slow almost to walking pace, one of the most guarded men in occupied Europe became, for perhaps 4 seconds, an open target. A third parachutist, Jozef Valčík, took up a position further along the road with a small pocket mirror, ready to flash a signal the instant the Mercedes came into view, buying Gabčík and Kubiš the few seconds they would need to take their places. Everything now rested on timing, on a jammed street corner, and on the arrogance of a man who did not believe he needed to be careful. On the morning of the 27th of May, they were in position. Valčík's mirror caught the sun. The Mercedes came around the bend exactly on time, exactly as it had every morning for months, slowing to make the turn just as a tram approached from the other direction and blocked the road ahead of it. Gabčík stepped into the street with the Sten gun under his coat, raised it, and pulled the trigger at point-blank range. The bolt did not move. The Sten was a cheap, mass-produced weapon, dropped by the thousands to resistance movements all across occupied Europe, and it carried a well-earned reputation for jamming, especially a weapon that had spent a Prague winter and spring hidden away with the rest of the team's equipment, gathering damp and grit in a mechanism that needed to be kept scrupulously clean. In the one machine on which the entire operation depended, in the 1/2 second when it mattered more than at any other moment in either man's life, the weapon had failed. Any trained officer in that instant does the one thing the plan absolutely cannot survive. He orders the driver to accelerate through the ambush and get clear. Heydrich did not. He ordered the car to stop, drew his own pistol, and rose to fight the man in front of him. The same contempt for danger that had put him in an open car in the first place, now keeping him rooted to the spot for the extra second that killed him. That second was long enough for Jan Kubiš, standing further along the pavement, to pull the pin from a modified British anti-tank grenade, a weapon built to punch through steel plate, never meant for a man's body, and throw it underhand at the stalled Mercedes. It struck near the rear wheel and detonated. The blast tore into the car's frame and its upholstery, driving a spray of shrapnel and horsehair stuffing from the ripped seats into Heydrich's back and side, shattering a rib, tearing his diaphragm, wounding his spleen. Shattered glass from the same explosion cut into Kubiš's own face. For a moment the street was smoke, twisted metal, and blood. And then, astonishingly, Heydrich was on his feet. He climbed out of the wrecked car, pistol in hand, and ran a short distance after Gabčík, firing, before the pain and the blood loss folded him in half against a lamp-post. He had been hit hard, but he was standing, conscious, furious, giving orders. There was no ambulance on that street. A Czech delivery driver's van was flagged down, and Reinhard Heydrich, chair of the Wannsee Conference, one of the most powerful men in the machinery of the Holocaust, was driven to Bulovka Hospital, propped against sacks and crates in the back of a grocery van, bleeding from wounds that, for the first several days, doctors did not believe would kill him. He was conscious. He was talking. Surgeons opened him up, removed his ruptured spleen, and for a few days the reports out of Prague suggested he would recover. that the assassination had failed the one job an assassination is supposed to do. Himmler, in Berlin, was told his most valuable lieutenant would live. Hitler, when he heard the details, was reportedly less relieved than enraged. Enraged that the man had been riding without an escort at all. Enraged that a governor of the Reich could be reached on an open street by two men with a homemade bomb. And then, in the days that followed, something began moving through Heydrich's body that no scalpel could reach. The wound had driven horsehair and fragments of upholstery deep into tissue that the surgeons could not fully clean, and infection took hold. His fever climbed. Propped up in his hospital bed, he joked with visitors and asked for music to be played in his room. Himmler sent his own personal physician racing to Prague to oversee the case, a mark of just how much Berlin needed this particular man to survive. It made no difference. Sepsis spread through his bloodstream, and on the morning of the 4th of June, 1942, 8 days after the grenade went off at the Hairpin curve, Reinhard Heydrich died. He had not been killed outright by the bomb that was meant to kill him outright. He had been killed by the infection the bomb left behind. Within weeks, Berlin would give his name to the very machinery he had helped design at Wannsee, the secret killing campaign that emptied the Jewish ghettos of occupied Poland into the death camps of Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka would be carried out from that summer onward under the code name Operation Reinhard in his memory. The man was gone. The system he had built kept running under his name. In London, when word reached the Czechoslovak government in exile, there was something close to celebration and something close to dread in the very same breath. Beneš had his proof for the Allies, the demonstration that Czechoslovak resistance could still reach into the heart of the Reich and strike its most feared officer dead. But every man and woman in that government had spent enough years watching Berlin's reprisals elsewhere in Europe to understand exactly what was coming next, and to understand that it would not fall on the two soldiers who had thrown the bomb. It would fall on the country that had sheltered them. And the moment word of Heydrich's death reached Berlin, it was clear that Hitler intended the price for it to be paid not by two soldiers hiding somewhere in Prague, but by an entire nation. Within hours, the manhunt became the largest the Protectorate had ever seen. Tens of thousands of German security police and soldiers fanned out through Prague and the surrounding countryside, sealing off districts, stopping trams, searching cellars and attics door by door, block by block, in a search that would eventually pass through tens of thousands of homes. A curfew locked the city down after dark. Posters went up overnight, offering a reward of 1 million Reichsmarks for information leading to the killers, an almost unimaginable sum to most Czechs living under wartime rationing, alongside warnings that anyone caught sheltering the assassins, or even failing to report knowledge of them, would be shot along with their entire family. And Hitler's fury did not stay contained to the search for two men. He wanted the Czech people to understand, in the most absolute terms available, what it cost to kill one of his men. Mass arrests began within hours of Heydrich's death and never really stopped in the weeks that followed. More than 1,000 people would eventually be shot on suspicion, on rumor, or on nothing at all. Entire families executed together for the crime of being related to someone under a cloud. Karl Hermann Frank, Heydrich's deputy, oversaw a campaign designed less to find the killers quickly than to make the whole country feel the weight of collective guilt, day after day, until someone talked. And then came Lidice. Based on a false denunciation linking the village to the resistance, a connection investigators never actually proved, German security police surrounded the small mining village of Lidice, northwest of Prague, before dawn on the 10th of June, 1942. Every man and boy over the age of 15 was rounded up and shot in batches against the wall of a farm building, 173 of them dead by the end of the day. The women were separated from their children and deported, most of them to the Ravensbrück concentration camp. Of the village's children, a small number judged suitable for so-called Germanization were taken from their mothers and given new names and new families inside Germany. The rest were sent to their deaths. Then the village itself was burned, its rubble bulldozed flat, its name struck from maps and, for a time, from official memory. Lidice did not exist anymore. It had been erased on purpose, as a warning, and the warning reached every household in the Protectorate within days. Somewhere in that same wave of terror, Berlin's investigators believed, was the answer to the question that mattered most to them now. Who had thrown the bomb, and where were they hiding? They were still in Prague, and they had not stopped moving since the morning of the attack. For 3 weeks after the throw at Libeň, Gabčík and Kubiš, along with several other parachutists from separate SOE missions who had gone into hiding alongside them, shifted from safe house to safe house across the city almost nightly, never staying anywhere long enough for a neighbor's suspicion to harden into a report. They heard the news of Lidice's destruction from the inside of someone else's apartment, understood exactly what it meant about the scale of the reckoning already underway, and kept moving anyway, because there was, in truth, nowhere left to run. Every road out of the city was watched, every station and checkpoint was searched. Forged papers could carry a man past one patrol and then a second, and the odds simply got worse with each one after that. There was no escape route left in the plan. There had never really been one. There was only the question of how much longer the network of families hiding them could keep absorbing that risk before it finally cost someone their life. It cost them everything in the end, through a door that all the courage in Prague could not lock from the inside, the door of a man who broke. Karl Čurda had parachuted into the Protectorate as part of a separate SOE mission months before, one of dozens of trained agents scattered across the country ahead of Operation Anthropoid. He was not in the church. He had no part in the killing itself. But as the reprisals mounted, and the terror of what had already happened to Lidice spread through every family with something to hide, Čurda's nerve gave way. He knew names, the safe houses, the network, the people who had kept Gabčík and Kubiš alive for half a year, and in the middle of June, with a fortune in reward money on offer and, by his own later account, fear for his own family's safety weighing on him as much as the money did, Karl Čurda walked into a Gestapo office in Prague and began to talk. He gave them names. Among the households he named was the Moravec family, who had sheltered the parachutists earlier in the operation. Gestapo agents arrived at their apartment before dawn. Marie Moravkova, the mother, was given a moment alone, and there, rather than face what was coming, she swallowed a cyanide capsule and died before they could question her at all. Her 17-year-old son, Atta Moravec, did not know precisely where the men were hiding at that hour. He was interrogated for hours, brutally, until his resistance finally broke, and he told them where to look. The Gestapo now had what Čurda's information alone had not given them: the crypt beneath the church of Saints Cyril and Methodius on Reslova Street in the heart of Prague. Before dawn on the 18th of June 1942, several hundred German security police and Waffen-SS troops surrounded the church in absolute silence, sealing every street and rooftop within sight of it. Inside, 7 exhausted men, low on ammunition, with nowhere left to run, heard the first boots on the stairs. 3 of the parachutists, Kubiš, Valčík, and Bublik, were positioned in the choir loft above the nave. When the assault began, they opened fire down into the German troops flooding into the church, and for close to 2 hours held off wave after wave of armed men with pistols, a submachine gun, and grenades, killing and wounding a number of the attackers before German fire and grenades finally silenced the loft. All 3 died there, fighting until they had nothing left to fight with. Below them, in the crypt itself, Gabčík, Opálka, Hruby, and Schwarz held the last position, a stone chamber with a single narrow entrance, the last defensible ground 4 living men had left in the world. German troops tried to force their way down the stairs and were driven back by gunfire from the dark. Engineers were brought up to blast the entrance wider with explosives. When that still failed to break them, the Germans turned fire hoses on the crypt, pumping water down through the stairwell for hours, trying to drown the men out or ruin what little ammunition they had left, while outside a crowd of curious Prague civilians and German officers gathered to watch a siege that would run on for most of the day. At one point, the 4 men clawed at a narrow ventilation shaft that led up toward a side street, digging at the brick and earth with their bare hands in the hope of breaking through to the surface and vanishing into the city one last time. There was not enough time and not enough shaft. Inside, in the freezing dark, with the water rising around their boots and the last cartridges counted out one by one, the 4 men in the crypt understood exactly what came next if the Germans reached them alive. They did not intend to find out what a Gestapo interrogation cell would do to them. As the water climbed and the ammunition ran out, one by one, in the dark beneath their own church, Jozef Gabčík, Adolf Opálka, Jan Hruby, and Jaroslav Schwarz turned their final rounds on themselves. In the days that followed, the Nazis' vengeance reached further still. Documents recovered in the investigation pointed to a hidden radio transmitter codenamed Libuše that a separate parachute team had operated from the small village of Ležáky, and on the 24th of June 1942, Ležáky suffered the same fate as Lidice. Every adult shot. The village burned to the ground, most of its children never seen again. Bishop Gorazd of the Czech Orthodox Church, who had sheltered the parachutists in his own cathedral, was arrested, tried, and executed by firing squad for the act of opening his crypt to them. Several of his priests were shot alongside him. Karel Čurda collected his reward money and lived under Gestapo protection for the rest of the war. Czechoslovak authorities found him after the liberation, tried him for treason, and hanged him in 1947. Otto Moravec survived his years in German captivity and lived to see liberation. The crypt beneath the church of Saints Cyril and Methodius, now preserved as the national memorial to the heroes of the Heydrich Terror, still bears the scars German engineers left trying to blast their way in.